Hey, what's going on everyone? In this endgame lesson, we're going to be talking about key squares. It is going to allow us to quickly determine if we have a winning position or if we're down a pawn, if we can save the game. And we're starting right now. Before we go into the lesson, let's look at this position here. It is white to play, but black is up a pawn. So what I want you to do is to keep this position in mind and let me know in the comments down below if white is going to be able to hold this position or if black is just simply winning and is going to be able to reach the key squares and win the game. And at the end of the video, we're going to return back to this position and we're going to see if your assessment was correct or not. So what are key squares? Key squares are those that if occupied by the strong king, in this case white since they're up a pawn, we're going to be able to win the game by promoting our pawn. So when the pawn is on the 5th rank, the key squares are going to be the 3 squares right in front of the pawn. In this case, they're going to be e6, f6, and g6. And if our king can occupy any of those squares, then we will be able to promote this pawn, get a queen, and win the game. So let's see how that looks like. We're going to grab our king, we're going to place it here on e6. Now black is going to be forced to move. If they come here, in this case, we push the pawn forward. Notice that we have won the opposition. The kings are opposing each other. And now when the king moves, we're going to again push our pawn. The king moves. We bring our king closer and now it supports the queening square. We're going to be able to get a queen and win the game. Returning to the beginning, we can go ahead now occupy the other square. Remember, the key squares are these 3 right in front of the pawn. So again, when the king moves, this time we're going to win by way of outflanking the king. We're going to come here. We're going to control the 7th rank. Now, whenever this king moves, we are going to support this pawn to the queening square, get a queen, and win the game. Something important here is that if it was black to move, this game will be a draw. Why? Because then black is going to be able to put the king here on f7, and that is going to prevent our king from coming into one of the key squares. Remember, the kings cannot be touching each other, so if the king was on f7, this will prevent the white king from occupying one of the key squares, and this game will be a draw. In this next example, again, our pawn is on the 5th rank, which means our key squares are the 3 right in front of the pawn, which are going to be here on f6, g6, and h6. Notice something, we have the knight's pawn, which is a little bit trickier. We need to keep in mind that this is going to give black some possibilities for stalemate. For example, if we move this pawn forward now, notice that this king has no squares to move to, and it will be a stalemate position, and black will be able to draw the game. So in order to win this position, we actually have to go ahead, put our king in one of the key squares, and then advance our pawn later. In this case, we're going to go king to g6. This king is going to be forced to go to g8. And now we go king to h6. And it doesn't matter where this king goes. It can go to f8 or back to h8. And you will see that we win the game no matter what. If he goes to h8, we push the pawn. And now we're going to be able to push it again because the pawn controls the h8 square. So once the king moves, we move our king forward, supporting the queening square, and we win the game. In this next example, notice something, that the pawn is on the 4th rank and not on the 5th rank like we previously had. So my question is, which are the key squares when the pawn is not on the 5th rank? Alright, if you said the squares right in front of the pawn, my friend, you will be mistaken. The new squares, the new key squares when the pawn is on the 4th rank are going to be 2 ranks ahead. In this case, it is going to be here on c6, d6, and e6. And this is true for any other rank except the 5th rank, in which case it will be the 3 squares right in front of the pawn. But any other rank, it will be 2 ranks ahead. So the way to win here with white is for this king to go ahead and reach one of the key squares. So let's see how we do that. Here we're going to go king here, the king moves, and now we're going to be able to go here, which is one of the key squares. Now we know, since our king is on a key square, that we're just going to win the game. So now when this king moves, we're going to go ahead, win the opposition, and when the king moves again, we're going to outflank the king and just simply march our pawn down the board, get a queen, and win the game. In this position, our pawn is on the 3rd rank. So what are the key squares? The key squares will be here on f5, g5, and h5. But my king is already occupying one of the key squares. So how do we outflank this king here? Well, in this case, we're going to use something called a reserve move. And we're going to go ahead and move our pawn. we have this reserve move. So now black is going to be forced to move. And whenever they do, we're going to outflank that king. Now, if the king comes here, we simply just continue pushing our pawn forward. And if the king goes back, again, we're going to win the opposition. And when the king moves, we're going to outflank the king and just march our pawn down the board, win the game. Now that you know about key squares, let's return to the original position and let's see if you were able to assess this correctly or not. Remember, it was white to play and you needed to figure out if the game could be saved or if black could reach the key squares in time in order to win the game. So what are the key squares here for black? Since the pawn is not on the 5th rank, the key squares are going to be 2 ranks ahead. So in this case, b3, c3, and d3. So the answer to the problem is that yes, white can save this position. And the way they're going to do that is by doing a combination of 2 things. They're going to win the distance opposition, and at the same time, they're going to prevent this black king from reaching these key squares here. The way we do that is by doing king to b1. Now, no matter where black goes, we're going to win the short opposition, and at the same time, we're going to prevent black from reaching the key squares, and we will draw this game. Notice that if they push the pawn, we're just going to hide behind the pawn now, and this is a theoretical draw. For more content, check out one of the videos on the screen. Thank you for watching. As always, stay safe, have a great day, show respect to your opponent. See you on the next video.